Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan. I've got Pete with me, and today, special guest, Derick McDuff. He is a freelance film critic. He's a podcaster. You may have listened to him on Underrated or read him on watchmojo.com. Derick, welcome to Films and Stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Great. Pete, what do we have to talk about today before we introduce Derick a little bit more?
So the topic at hand for today is we're going to be talking about Avatar 2, The Way of Water.
Oh, man.
It's a small indie film. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's by first-time director James Cameron.
It's hard to find a cinema that's showing it, right?
It's really tough to find, but, if you can, I think you should go out and seek it. Support James Cameron. The industry needs your help.
I had to drive to LA just at 2 a.m. just to see this one.
Oh, tell me about it. So why don't we kick off, Derick? Why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like you guys mentioned, I'm a freelance critic and podcaster. I've written for a few places, like you mentioned, most prominently Watch Mojo, where I get to write top 10 lists about all kinds of cool pop culture stuff, and I get to write about movies quite a bit there. But yeah, I do my podcast Underrated every other week, where me and a couple friends talk about films that are underrated and ones that have kind of passed people by. We just talked about The Thief and the Cobbler, which has a really interesting production history if anybody's not familiar with it. It's a just kind of like 90s movie that had been in production since the 60s, and just get to talk about some really fascinating films over there.
Oh man, we got to probably talk about a lot of other films that you've done a deep dive into, but as Pete mentioned today, we've got Avatar, The Way of Water, and I'm sure we've got a lot of stuff to discuss, right? There's no lack of ink spilled about this film, but Derick, first you, and then I'll go to Pete. What were your expectations going into this film?
So going in, actually, my expectations were kind of low. I'm not the biggest fan of the first Avatar. I thought, technically, obviously, it's incredible and groundbreaking, and the 3D of it all is really good. Everybody for, 15 years was trying to copy the 3D effects of it with very few successes. We did get, especially for the first 5 years after Avatar, all those just kind of bad CG or 3D movies. A lot of them weren't even shot digitally. They did that kind of paper cutout type thing. So going into this one, I had definitely, let's say, tempered expectations for going back to Pandora.
Pete, are you on the same boat?
Very much so. I think we've talked about it in the past. Avatar, I think the thing that made Avatar a huge success wasn't the story. I think the story was nothing we haven't seen before. It's a tale as old as time. It's about imperialism. It's about colonialism. It's about the exploitation of resources. So what made that movie, I think, were two things. One, the sci-fi element of it, which was, at that time, the graphics were some of the best we'd ever seen. The visual effects were some of the best. And I think it was also the exemplar of what 3D video could be in cinema. Before that, everyone had heard about 3D, and, it used to be, remember back in the day when we were kids, we had those red and blue cardboard things that came out with our Nintendo system. They had that, it's that's what we thought of when we thought of cheesy 3D. And then James Cameron came out and said, no, we're going to show you what 3D really is. And, where we saw the arrows coming out of the screen and it looks like they were going to cut us down. It was some of the best VFX I've ever seen before. And I think ever since, really, a lot of people have tried. I can think of one scene in all of 3D thereafter that I thought was good, but it was really just literally one scene. And it was that water droplet effect from Gravity. The Sandra Bullock and George Clooney.
Yeah. That's right.
It. I can't think of any other 3D that was good at all.
I will say that I really did, of the live action stuff, I did really like Hugo in 3D. That was the one time where I think
touche.
that it
Yeah,
really
yeah.
worked.
Yeah, but I think what we're saying is, generally speaking, those were, let's say, exceptions, not the rule. And
Oh, yeah.
3D was much more of a gimmick and also a great opportunity for cinemas to charge an extra for me in London, it was like the cinemas were charging an extra £2 to £3, and you had to pay an extra like £2 or £3 for like the deposit on those, because the cinemas I went to here had two options. You could either get one of those cheapo plastic 3D glasses with like literally it looked like you were watching a movie through cling film and saran wrap, or you could pay an extra like premium of like basically £5 or whatever it was, and they gave you those like really fancy 3D glasses, which had like a little battery in there, and it was supposed to be like synced to the movie. And who knows if it actually was or wasn't. But as someone who wears glasses normally, I went out of my way to find a 2D version of a movie instead of a 3D version. Avatar was the first one where I was like, no, if everyone's talking so much about it, I have to go look for the 3D version, and I'll suffer in silence wearing it on top of my normal glasses.
Oh, that's right. I never even thought about people who wear glasses. So you have to put the 3D glasses on your normal glasses, right?
Yeah,
You've got
exactly.
the layer.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's tough. Okay, so Derick had tempered kind of low expectations. Pete, despite your love of 3D, still kind of like
even lower
about it.
Yeah.
And I'm the same. And I don't know why. Actually, I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes that I should have been excited about because it is sci-fi, it's a big franchise, it's James Cameron. But I was the same way, like, I'm not really like that excited about it, like, compared to like Top Gun Maverick, right? Where I was like bouncing and, like a kid before Christmas, like, putting a big red X over the dates on my calendar. Avatar, like, I didn't really know when it came out. I wasn't excited to see it, like the grand opening, like, it's like, I'll get to it. Eventually we'll do a podcast about it. I'll see it. I guess I have to say, I think I was a little bit wrong about that. I probably should have had higher expectations because
let's segue into that.
I quite enjoyed it. Were you guys the same?
No, I did too. Like, I had a lot of fun with this one. And I think a big part of the reason for me is that the first one was just written by James Cameron. And like you guys mentioned, like, the story was never what the draw was. It's all about the world and the world building and all that stuff, which was all good in the first one. But he brought on a team in this one of writers and people to kind of build out the world and build out the characters. And the people he brought in were Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. And I'm really fans of theirs. They wrote the rebooted Apes trilogy, all three movies. I think that their additions, they didn't like radically make the plot, something amazing and interesting, but I think it went from just being something just incredibly generic to just kind of like a simple plot. And I think that was a much better direction, just to be like, okay, we're just going to kind of live in this world. Like, it was almost like at times a Terrence Malick movie, where it's like, we're just going to go over here and hang out with this whale and just like experience everything. And I thought that was really cool. The dialogue I thought was a lot better in this movie. Like, there's that line in the first one where Sigourney Weaver is like, they're pissing on us and calling us rain. And like, to this day, I'm like, that's one of the worst lines I've ever heard in cinema. So you can really tell that it's like, okay, yeah, like Jimmy brought in some writers on this one. The characters, I feel like in this one are a lot stronger, especially I think it's Talokan, the whale. Yep. The whale who, you don't even see talk, like he's just, is, speaking in whale and you're reading the subtitles, is one of the best characters, you're really invested. And, and then it is still a James Cameron movie with an insanely good ending. Like, that ending where it just becomes Titanic for 45 minutes was so thrilling and captivating. There is still some stuff in it where it's like, okay, this is still kind of cheesy James Cameron, and the fact that they're like, somehow Korra's returned. I was a little bit like, okay, whatever. But they do some interesting things in it. It feels like James Cameron is dealing with the fact that he has, like, him being maybe not the best dad to his kids, and kind of just like an authoritarian, and he's working all of that out through his movies. But yeah, once again, really cool to just be in this world and just kind of see and experience and watch it. And, you know, as someone who's played a lot of video games in my life, the water effects in this are astounding. Like, I could not believe it. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this. Even if it wasn't like one of my top 10 films of the year, it was a very, very enjoyable film going experience for me.
Yeah. And you raised a really good point. And it's one of the notes that I made immediately after, you know, this was what I think is super interesting is that I too play a lot of video games. And I think, you know, my era of video games really kicked off in the early to mid 90s. You were considered a top tier video game when you had FMV in it, you know, full motion video, because they didn't have the technology or the computing horsepower to make really good cutscenes. So what they used to do is they'd grab a camera and they'd actually film something and then digitize it. So, you know, famously, you know, Command and Conquer, all these games had FMV sequences in there. And now we've kind of gone the opposite direction, which is to say now we've got, in films, we've got these CG computer generated scenes, and clearly a lot of the movie seems like it, especially because this is, I don't know about you guys, but my screening was the high frame rate version. So it was all like, I guess, 48 frames per second. So it was moving really fast. And I don't know if that's for all of them, but like this for me felt like it was moving much, much faster than you would expect from a normal movie production. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, just compounded the video gaminess, if you will, of some of the effects. Really stood out a lot, especially in the rain sequences towards the end of the movie when they're fighting it out on that hovercraft. Some of the most stunning visual effects I've ever seen, even though, yes, there are sometimes it crossed the uncanny valley, but still, I think it was phenomenal visual imagery.
Why are the critics so negative on this film? Because, I mean, I can't say that I've read everything online, right? But the general consensus I get from critics, right? Guardian and the other kind of like major trades is that they've been kind of panning this film. Is that right generally as a consensus, and is that fair? Because we all had fun with this movie, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm curious now that you bring that up. I'm looking up Rotten Tomatoes and seeing, okay, so it's got a 77 on Rotten Tomatoes. So, you know, that means, yeah, about a quarter of the critics disliked this movie, which seems kind of low, especially since this is, I mean, we're recording this right before the Oscars get nominated, but this is probably going to get nominated for Best Picture. I can see, like, why some critics would be hard on it, because it is a 3-hour just kind of like movie where like not a lot happens. It does do a thing which I really don't like, which is it feels like when they make a movie and then they're like, okay, we're just going to make this actually a series of movies, and the second one doesn't really have a conclusion. Like, it's like, okay, we're putting things in to just kind of finish later. Like the Pirates of the Caribbean second one is a really notorious example of that, I feel like. A lot of movies that came out in like the aughts right after Lord of the Rings became a trilogy, and they like retroactively made all these movies trilogies. So there's some of that where they're like, oh, here's Edie Falco, but don't worry about her. She'll be important in Avatar 4, whatever. I can see why some of that might be in it. It's, you know, it does feel like, okay, we're just here to set up this world. And admittedly, like a lot of better stuff came out this year. I think that there were some like 2023 was just such an incredible year for movies, and you guys discussed some of them on your podcast where you're talking about kind of the top 10 things of the year. But yeah, so I think maybe just comparing it to, you know, something like Banshees of Inisherin, which has an absolutely incredible script and just deft characters and is really funny. Yeah, maybe on that aspect, because this is almost just like a theme park ride, and like I brought up earlier, this is
a popcorn movie, right? I mean, this is a bring the family, everyone get your popcorn. Yeah. But I think that's one of the things that I liked about it, which is as I recall, there's no vulgarity, There's no sex, although everyone is kind of like dressed in kind of weird bikinis and stuff. There's not a lot of like gratuitous violence. I mean, in terms of being appealing to everybody, you can watch this with your mom without being, cringy. You can bring a girlfriend who doesn't really like sci-fi. You can bring, your buddy who didn't see the first one. You can take like your kids or your niece or nephew. Like, for me, one of the nice things about this film is that it appeals to everybody, and the story is easy to follow. And yes, sometimes it gets lost in its own, like elongated storytelling, but it's a very enjoyable film to watch. We know all about the visual stuff. We'll never stop talking about that. So I'm a little bit curious why the critics are so negative about it when they're expecting, or maybe they're holding it to the standard, of this Academy Award level dialogue, when it's not intended to be that, right? It's intended to be a box office, blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you actually, Derick, because, you're there, you're in California, you've clearly been a part of this industry, you write. So what is your opinion on that? I get the feeling, and I think Ethan's kind of alluding to that, is that I think sometimes the mentality I get from some of the awards houses and, these awards like nominating committees and so forth is a little bit more like, if it's too quote unquote mainstream, whatever that means, and not art housey enough, again, whatever that means. I'm not trying to put a definition to it. I'm being very vague on purpose. Then it kind of gets disregarded from awards consideration, right? Like, if you think about superhero movies as a genre, it's good or bad. I'm not saying they're all good. I'm not saying they're all bad, but generally speaking, you get the feeling that a lot of critics kind of poo-poo that genre of popcorn flick because it's almost too quote unquote lowbrow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with you, and it's something that I'm a really big fan of the Marvel movies. And they are films that, critics love to just like tear apart and just kind of look down their noses at.
Right.
And I think maybe they might, like, critics might have a consensus like of one popcorn movie a year that they get behind, so they don't seem too out of touch. And I think this year it's Top Gun Maverick, which is obviously a great film. And, I think that they are, like, with the practical effects and everything they're doing are really great. But I think they're like, okay, see, yeah, we do like popcorn movies. They point to Top Gun, and they're like, we liked this. I gave A.O. Scott or whoever. I don't know what he gave anything, but like people are like, oh, I gave this movie a good review, so I do like. I'm a common man. I like what the people like.
Yeah. I'm capable of it, right?
Yeah, and then meanwhile they're just like, oh, and then that's why Marvel movies never get nominated for any Academy Awards or anything, just because they are seen as this kind of lower art for the masses. And it just kind of makes me think that I actually saw this movie. I saw this movie twice, and the second time I saw it with both of my brothers, one of whom was a film major, and one of whom was just, a guy. He just likes movies. And I was actually sitting between them, and that was such an interesting experience because my film major brother, who was sitting on my right, he was watching it. He kept being, like, I kept hearing him like scoff, like, "Oh!" Like anytime something would happen that was admittedly dumb. Like they were like, "Oh, this brain juice from the whale can make humans live forever," which is a dumb plot point. But he would just, and then like all these things would be happening. And then my other brother, like I just turned, like he's just watching it. He's just like, "The whale's my favorite," and I'm like, "Yeah, me too, man." So I think you can really go in with two different mindsets. You can like it for what it is, or you can be cynical about it. And I've tried not to be as cynical about movies, especially recently. So I had a really good time with it.
That's a very good point, but I compare this to, remember earlier this year, earlier in 2022, Jurassic World Dominion came out, right? Mm-hmm. And Pete and I, like, we had nothing good to say about that movie. That's a very, very big franchise, right? That's $1 billion franchise, worldwide known. And that movie we thought was like just rubbish, start to finish, right? That was just rubbish. And Avatar is not. I mean, Avatar had the same thing where it's a blockbuster. It could have been like super miserable and people just went because of the branding and because of, it was in every single screen and every single cinema. but it was actually enjoyable. And I think that's the distinction that critics kind of didn't make between that and like Jurassic World Dominion, which is, yes, there were kind of like some silly plot points if you think about the whale juice and the waste of like throwing away this whole big whale and all the drama that went into just capturing it. I'm sure there's a better way to get this, but right. I mean, that is silly, but compared to like Jurassic World Dominion, I thought this was a very reasonable film, right? There were very few gaps where you're just like, oh man, like this is going nowhere. Like I'm going to go get a popcorn or I'm going to go to the toilet. Like this is not like moving at all. I thought the film flowed really, really well and it was cohesive. There were obviously a lot of parts that could have been taken from like 20 minutes to like 10 minutes.
2 minutes?
So we didn't have to sit there. So we didn't have to sit there for, like half a day, but overall
this
it
was by and far a bladder buster, not just a blockbuster.
It was, yeah.
Look, I get
why so long.
Why are you making a 3-hour movie about water, James Cameron? You're going to make us all go to the bathroom.
Yeah,
I just think it's funny.
Absolutely right.
I think this is, I think like the cynic inside me, which is like, okay. On one hand, James Cameron blasts the MCU because, he considers them like theme park rides, right? Which is these movies which are generally speaking devoid of any message or, I think he thinks of them like as like high calorie, low nutrient foods. And then he comes out with Avatar, which, to be very frank, the cynic in me says 90% of this can be converted at any Disney theme park for a phenomenal water park ride, and you can have an immense 3D experience out of it. When they leave the forest and move to the water world, right, for the first time, and they have that so-called training montage where the family's learning how to swim and is learning how to swim with the fish and the different sea creatures and all of that. That was like a good 40 minutes long, that entire training montage. And that's effectively what it was. It was a really long training montage, which we've seen in other movies where, Rocky is running up the steps of the museum in 10 seconds. He's gone from zero to hero. And of course, I'm being specious for argument's sake as an exemplar, but they could have done something similar. It didn't need to be as long as it was. 3 hours could have maybe been like 2 hours and a half. And even then, it's still a bit...
I agree.
Maybe a bit strong. Even then, it's still a bit long for a movie that had a really thin plot, I thought.
There's got to be like someone who works for the company who's there just for like common sense, right? Call him the chief common sense officer who's got to say during the screening, okay, guys... we're at 2 hours, 15 minutes, start to wrap it up. At 2 hours, 30 minutes, he's got to say, that's it. And at 2:45, he's got to say, like, just unplug the projector. It cannot go past 2 hours, 45 minutes, right? It's just good value for money, if that's your metric, but it's unbelievably long. Too long, and I think it detracts from everything that it's done up to that point, because at the end, you're physically exhausted. Honestly, it's hard to enjoy. The last scene, as you mentioned, Derick, is a really, really good scene. At that point, though, you're just so exhausted by everything that you're like, okay, like let's wrap it up, right? Someone win, someone lose. Let's see what's happening in the next one, and let's just move on for another day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about all of that. This is a movie where it's just like, you're just kind of like living in this world, and it feels like James Cameron just has so much that he just wants to like let you live. And he's one of these guys who I think probably still one of the few directors probably still has Final Cut, where he's just like not going to get any studio notes, and nobody's going to make him cut his movie down. And I'm very much usually against studio interference, but sometimes you'll see something like I talked about on my podcast, The New World, and guest I had on, Alex Calleros, was talking about how he really prefers the theatrical cut to any of the much longer cuts that Terrence Malick did, because it is just kind of a lot of like living in this world and whispering poems and stuff like that. And I think that, this film could have maybe benefited from, it's like the Lord of the Rings. I love those movies and I love being in that world, but the theatrical cut was a lot shorter. And then when he's like, all right, now we're going to do the extended cuts, that's going to come out on home video, so that when you get, your 3+ hour versions, you're in the comfort of your own home, you can pause it and go to the bathroom.
Right.
Because I'm not gonna lie, like when it was that part you're talking about where it's like the extended training montage, I was like, all right, well I've had a drink, I'm watching a movie about water. There's still 2 hours to go. I'm just gonna go right now and miss a little.
You've got
to
to pace
movie.
yourself, You're making all these strategic decisions during the movie about like how long you can hold out. Yeah, it's really long.
But Derick, you've raised a really good point. The other thing is that you're right. Who amongst us has the guts to go to James Cameron and say, by the way, this is too long. You got to cut it. Probably by the end of this weekend, if not this weekend, definitely middle of this coming week, James Cameron is going to own 3 of the 5 highest grossing movies of all time. And that's not insignificant, right? If you can say 30% of the top 10 and 60% of the top 5 movies are movies that I've made, you know what? No Hollywood studio is going to say, all right, we got to put the shackles on this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing.
That's what I said, though. That he's going to be a monster to try to control. If that's your track record, he's going to ask for a $500 million budget for the next one. And like you said, he's going to have authority over every single scene and sequence. He's going to be a monster to control.
Yeah, and I think especially since the era of like quote unquote auteur filmmakers has more or less ended, and that we don't really have a lot of guys like this. Like, in the 70s and 80s especially, you had all of these kind of director-driven pictures.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of problems with the auteur theory about like, oh, there's this direct, like the movie springs from the director's head and like nobody else, the writers and the actors and nobody else matters. It's just the director who's pushing this thing forward. Is kind of the narrative from that theory
it's
that I really
breed,
disagree
though.
with.
It's
but
gone.
It's that kind of theory is really kind of given way for like, franchise films. And I have complicated thoughts on that too. But, even guys like Scorsese and Spielberg, their movies are opening to low numbers, or they're like having to go to Netflix to get their things made. And, these directors that used to be like, I can just do whatever I want and go into the jungle and blow things up and make Apocalypse Now because I did The Godfather and just spend however, go over budget, that you can't do that anymore. So the fact that James Cameron is maybe one of like 2 or 3 guys, maybe Chris Nolan's the only other one that can just kind of like get his blank check and do whatever he wants. It's
who's
not
the third one? Who's the third one? Okay,
that's
Nolan,
a good question.
Tarantino, but he's out of the game. Who else?
Yeah, that's a good it might just be those 2. I could probably think of something if I thought about it.
You mentioned Spielberg, but I agree that he maybe can get that check to be given to him, but he probably has to grovel a little bit more than he did in the past, right?
I don't know about that. Like, say what you will. I think Spielberg, I don't want to say he's transitioned away from the big blockbusters. That's not what I'm saying at all. But, like, if you look, I think his last movie was The Fabelmans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that.
Did not do well.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying is that I think it was just, I think that was a very personal story for him. I think that was more like, I'm not really making this for making $150 million this weekend or $200 million this weekend, whatever it is. It's a close to my heart story. It's semi-autobiographical. I get that. I don't see James Cameron really doing something like that. I see James Cameron being like, if I'm going to introduce anything that's semi-autobiographical into it, I'll put it in the Avatar and make allusions to my personal life about it. And that's kind of it. 3 years ago, I would have said Michael Bay. Maybe 5 years ago, I would have said Michael Bay is another.
I was thinking Bay.
Some Michael Bay. Yeah,
I honestly was thinking Bay, but Ambulance failed too, which was a shame because it's his best movie in 10 years, if not ever.
But the good thing about Ambulance was also it was a relatively low budget film. So,
where he discovered the use of the drone.
Oh my God, yes. Yes. I could go on about it. If this was an ambulance podcast.
Yeah.
It could be. We had that episode and we had a lot of fun with it. But we definitely pointed out the use of the drone.
Yeah, I talked about that a lot. I did my top 5, my Patreon, and or my top 10, it was my number 5. I loved Ambulance.
And you raised, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but gone are those days where you see a nice 90 to 110 minute long movie, short, concise, very low stakes, not a world-ending thing, not about anything beyond, a very quick heist or a quick robbery gone wrong. All of those are gone these days.
And when it ends, it's done, right?
It's done.
Yeah.
You can go home and you've got some closure. It's just
You're
nice
not worried about where Ambulance 2 is going. You're not worried about, and we've joked about it a lot, I think, Ethan, especially with Jared Butler. He's kind of transitioned from this, I call it the dad shin movies, right? Dad action. Like he's like not quite past his prime, but certainly not in the midst of his prime either physically. He was unbelievable in cut, super fit in a loincloth in 300. But I think it would be in the realm of close to impossibility for him to do that now. But he's still doing that dad action movie like Olympus Has Fallen or, Plane is coming out in the next couple of weeks, that kind of thing, which, your 40 to 50-year-old dad loves to see.
Unshaven, a diet of cold pizza and scotch.
He's got
that's
a
his
six-pack
new sweet spot
and
now.
a carton of Marlboros. And, it's the kind of thing that, your dad could be like, yeah, that's me. I can see myself doing all that. I could save the day if a terrorist tried to hijack my plane. That kind of thing,
Yeah, he's taken over the role from Liam Neeson, I think,
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so we've kind of talked about it. So let's talk. Maybe we go into a little bit more structure. What did you guys specifically dislike about the movie? And then we'll end on what we specifically liked about the movie. I like to end on a high note. But was there anything about Avatar 2 that kind of surprised you or kind of struck you the wrong way?
I think one of the disappointments of this movie, and I think it ties into why I wasn't super enthusiastic about it, is that I don't really feel a connection to any of the characters or any of the storylines. There's not a deep love story. I mean, there is. I mean, it's very family oriented, and that's sweet in its own way. Honestly, it's really nice to see a movie like that where the family values are embodied, but I don't feel a kinship to any single character. I'm not sure who I'm really, really rooting for, or who I'm really, really rooting against, or who I'm looking at and being like, man, that dude is cool. I wish I were him. I just don't feel like this connection to any character, to any of the plot dramas that, Cameron has tried to manufacture with all the kids and the outsiders and the parents and stuff like that. He's definitely trying, but I'm just not feeling any of that. That's my disappointment, I guess.
Yeah, one thing that that really didn't work for me was the voiceover in this one, because it felt really unnecessary. Like, this is a movie that is we talked about how incredibly visually literate it was, and it just kind of teaches you about the world just through looking at it. You don't need Jake to tell you, and then we went to go see the sea people. It's like, yeah, I can see that. You don't need to do that. And that's obviously a relic from the first one where Jake Sully was kind of narrating. But in that movie, it made narrative sense because he is recording all of his... Yeah, he's doing his log. And it's this one, it's like, who is he talking to? Why is he saying... why are we hearing this? He's not doing a log anymore. Why are we hearing him, his inner thoughts, explained to us like we're watching a movie? It doesn't jive with the first one. And then also the other thing that bugged me a little bit was, like I said, kind of before, the return of Korch, Stephen Lang is great. He does some interesting things, with, his psychology in this, and him crushing the skull was cool, but, it's the same thing as, it's somehow Palpatine returned. It's all right, we just gotta bring back, the bad guy from the first one, because he was a good bad guy.
Oh, that's a good reference. Yeah, it's true.
I just hate that, okay, because he had his arc, he went through the whole thing, and then he defeated him, and it's just he's back now again, we just gotta beat the same guy, and it's alright, we're doing this again, okay.
But do you risk, I have to say, the storyline, I mean, I had zero expectation about the story that they could even create after the first one. I have to say, I thought that they created, a pretty decent story. Maybe it wasn't without any flaws or plot holes. But overall, I was impressed that being very skeptical going into this in terms of what else can they talk about, right? Like, everyone should be living happily ever after now. I thought, like, actually they did a decent job to kind of stitch it together. If I were to poke some holes into it, I wouldn't have really strong ideas in terms of how they could have, like, made it, like, a little bit more compelling. So I was generally okay with it, but I agree that some of the narrative stuff was,
Yeah, I think
Not
the
so
thing
great.
was a lot of the big ideas, which were clearly from
Yeah.
James Cameron, were like a little bit clunky, but the
Mhm.
execution of them, and I think this once again goes back to Jaffa and Silver, was handled really well. Like, I was not at all excited about him coming back as a character, but I think that plot line was a lot more engaging and endearing than I thought it had any right to be. And I do think that comes to just bringing in at least other voices rather than just being like one sounding voice, and I think that is, once again, kind of something that's opposed to the auteur theory. You have to bring in these other people, these other voices to make your movies work.
So Jaffa and Silver have done the third one as well, right? That's already been written. It's already been filmed.
Yeah, 3 is basically, as I understand it, 3 is basically filmed. They're just working on the post-production stuff. And I think that 4 and maybe 5 have been written, but there's no boots on the ground. So they've all been planned out, but only 3 has been filmed, I think.
And 3 is coming out at the end of 2023, right?
I think 2024. I think there's going to be there's going to do it every other year is the plan.
So like Christmas 2024, end of year 2024.
Yeah.
And that was filmed like 5 years ago now, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing,
So that would've
that's
been-
the plan, because this was supposed to come out in 2014, so who knows, Like, it's one of those movies where it just kept getting pushed back and back and back. That was the thing I was going to talk about. I was like, I kind of didn't believe this movie was ever going to come out until I sat and saw it, because it just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and then COVID happened and it got delayed even further, and you're like,
man.
this is never going to happen, and then it did, and you're like, oh wow, this is real.
Edie Falco was so funny about it. You read her story, right?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's so good.
I thought that was classic. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so honest. Like, I had no idea. I thought this already came out.
Yeah, 'cause she shot it like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah.
She thought it came out and bombed,
Bless her.
I mean, just so genuine that you would make such a statement, right? Like,
So, we I think all had the same idea in terms of it. It's finally out. I would say argument goes that the credit probably goes to Tom Cruise and Top Gun for kind of being the authoritative stamp on cinema's back. And I'm a big fan of cinema, as in the experience of going to the theater, buying a tub of popcorn, buying your soda. And look, I mean, we always make that same joke. The ticket costs $10, but the experience costs $50 because concessions are expensive. You have to deal with other people. It's a nightmare. All of that stuff is fine. But I still think it's kind of the best way to enjoy a movie. I love the convenience of Netflix. I love the convenience of streaming. But if you told me, would you rather watch Top Gun 2, or in this case now Avatar 2 in the theater versus at home, having watched it, I'm glad I saw it in the theater. And I think one of the advantages one of the realities of Avatar 2 finally coming out, even though it took so long, is that the fact that it made over $1 billion in 10 days kind of says to me, hey, and I mentioned this before, cinema's back. And I think that was James Cameron and Tom Cruise kind of saying, the pandemic is no longer an excuse for any cinematographer, any filmmaker, any studio to say, this is why the movie suffered in the theaters or didn't suffer or whatever. I think we're long past that now. So kudos to the two
I'm
of them.
surprised, but Pete, I'm surprised that you gave Tom Cruise the credit and not Nicolas Cage, because usually anything good that happens in the industry, you somehow link to Nick Cage. So I have to say, it's very objective of you to find another A-list superstar to...
What I didn't say is that Tom Cruise and Nicolas Cage are besties, and he actually gave me the advice to sit on it. Sorry, Derek, as you may not know, but I am 110% infatuated with Nicolas Cage. Anything he does, I'm
As
all
you
in
should
on.
be. Yeah, he's amazing. He's incredible. I love Nick Cage. He's oh my gosh. Yeah.
I'm so excited for Renfield. I think that comes out in April. I can't wait.
Oh my gosh. I am really excited.
When Pete becomes a billionaire, he is going to relive that movie.
I am inviting him for my 50th birthday. I will ask him to come and
It will
see
be
me.
equally creepy. It will be equally creepy as well. Where he sees your museum of all the wax sculptures and all the... It will be equally creepy for sure.
That was such a good bromance. Him and Pedro Pascal was so great in that movie.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But Pete, I think you're really hitting on something about this, like Tom Cruise and then also James Cameron, them sitting on these movies and waiting to release it. Because you had some, like who I mentioned before, Nolan. As soon as like theaters were like back open in like July or August of 2020, was like, all right, I'm going to release Tenet now. And, no one saw that movie because everything was still shut down and people didn't want to go out in the world.
Decision.
Rightly
Agreed.
so. Yeah. And then Tom Cruise was like, no, we gotta wait. And there is, like you said, so much to that theatrical experience. I would say it's those two movies, and then I would say there was one other one too, which I did not unfortunately get to see in theaters, and I wish I did, but RRR, which came out this past year. Like, those three were like the holy trinity of like, oh my god, theaters are back and going back and seeing a cinematic, like, theatrical experience. And I think... I also love that, and there are some movies that really lend themselves to that more than others. Like, I don't honestly know if I'll rewatch this at home ever, because I've never watched the first one out, because it's just, you know, this is a movie to see on the big screen with people in a crowded theater in 3D. And then, like, I remember, like, this year I saw a movie which I liked more than this, but I wouldn't rewatch it probably ever. It doesn't have that same, like, oh my gosh, I gotta have fun watching this. And that's something like Tar, which I saw in a theater, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I saw this, but, like, I didn't need to see Tar in a theater, you know? Like, it was a packed, like, theater, and I was just like, okay, that was kind of a weird experience, you know? So there's some movies that definitely play a lot better on the big screen, especially when you're just there and you can't look at your phone or anything, and you theoretically can't go to the bathroom, but you kind of got it on this one. So yeah, that experience, and I think it was James Cameron who just came out and said, like, that's a big part of the reason to go to the movies, is because not only because you get to see it on the big screen, but because you eliminate all distractions. You can't pause it. You can't glance at your phone. You're like glued in with everyone else, and that shared experience of cinema, like, we are all going through this together at once. Like, we're all experiencing this theoretically for the first time together here tonight. It is something that is so unique and something that I really appreciate.
Are we all more excited now? Are we all more excited now for Avatar 3? Whatever. Is there a working title for it?
They haven't said. There's rumors. There's like
something with fire, right?
So there's rumors that there's like going to be the Ash. It was like the Ash people, but that didn't come from, like, unless it's from like Deadline or the Hollywood Reporter. I don't really trust it. It came from, you know, off-brand. Like, what? Like, there's like 3 or 4 places that if it comes from, you know, it's real. And then there was also rumors that it was going to be called the Seed Bearer, but I don't think James Cameron or any of the official trades have come out and said definitively what it's going to be.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also been a lot of memes and jokes because, you know, the anime and the animated series Avatar has the 4 elements, right? So we've seen a little bit of the earth. We saw water. So everyone's assuming the next one's going to be fire, you know, so who knows? So
and then the air,
yeah. So we'll see how things go with that. But I will say that the first 45 minutes of the movie made me think, oh, okay, this is going to be a subpar, or not subpar, but just a so-so, you know, popcorn flick.
Oh, really?
And I think it was the last 30 minutes, you know, where they started really setting up the stakes. And, you know, it was that voiceover narration where Jake goes, the sky people aren't going to stop. We have to take the fight to them, right? And I think that was the 3-hour message of this movie, is that you can go on the defense as long as you want, but they're never going to stop chasing you for whatever reason, by the way. I think it's a ridiculous thing, but fine. I think there was a paper thin reason for them to continue chasing him, because, you know, he kind of cut his losses and run, but that wasn't enough for this guy. So, you know, the colonel wants to go back in there. Fine. I don't care. I did like the fact that they're now saying, hey, we're going to take the fight to them. I got really confused with the spider thing, and maybe you two can help me out. So look, Neytiri loses her son, and then she goes a son for a son. She threatens to kill Spider, right? Spoiler alert, by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen this. And she cuts his neck, but doesn't quite kill him. She almost kills him or threatens to, right?
I think she cuts him in the chest, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? But she threatens to kill him. Mm-hmm. Spider saves the bad guy. But then at the end of the movie, Spider gets adopted by them, and because Jake says the same thing, he says a son for a son? Am I right? Did he get adopted by Jake or no?
I mean, I don't know about legal adoption, but it does seem
what I mean. Like,
by Jake, welcomed him into the family.
At that point in the movie, my mindset was, I need so badly to go to the bathroom, but I know that I can't. Yeah. I couldn't really focus. So what?
That's a hard part about having a jackpot at the end of a marathon is that you're the least focused. Right? And you're focused on all the other things in terms of, I'm out of popcorn, I've got to go to the toilet, like, is this wrapping up? Like, my kids are starting to act up, whatever the issue is. And we've waited all movie, and Cameron's kind of teased us. Is Spider, I mean, so to speak, a good guy, a bad guy? Is he loyal, not loyal? Is he going to go with his father and his Sky People roots or not? And I agree, Pete, kind of at the end, it gets a little bit of fuzzy and it's flip-flopping kind of quite a bit. But my take at the end is that Spider goes with Sully's, and now he's kind of, so to speak,
a part of their tribe, right?
A part of their tribe.
Yeah. The way I took it was like, he reminded me a lot, especially since I saw this movie with my brothers. If you guys ever, like, when you were kids, you had that one neighbor kid, like, maybe he's a little bit younger than you and your brothers, but he's always kind of there at your house. He always kind of comes over and eats your sandwiches, and he's not quite one of the family, but he's kind of always around. He's one of the family. Yeah. That's how Spider felt. Yeah. Like, he felt like the little neighbor kid that always kind of hangs out, and now they've gone to another place, and he's kind of ended up there. And maybe the neighbor kid has a shitty dad, and so, but he still loves his dad, and he's got all these complicated, wrapped up feelings, and that's what this felt like a lot. Like, when he saves his dad, he's like, I don't like that I'm doing this, but I kind of like, he's my dad, and, Jake and Neytiri didn't really adopt me like they did with this other one, and, like, by the way, that was one thing I didn't mention before. Like, Neytiri kind of sucks in this movie. Like, I liked her a lot in the first one. She's kind of like a mean racist in this movie when she's just like ready to kill Spider, and Spider's like, oh, like, this is a bluff, right? And then she's like, no, it's not a bluff. And Neytiri, like, doesn't hate Spider, but she's like not gonna lose any sleep from like murking this kid.
Right.
So,
yeah, he's like very expendable to her.
Mm-hmm. And, like, Jake would not do that, but, like, yeah, Neytiri was, like, ready to, like, that was one piece of characterization I don't know if I liked.
What if, at the end of the movie, Spider went with his dad and set it up so that it became Spider versus the 3 remaining kids? So it became, like, the next generation. Because right now it's ambiguous as to what kind of happens in the next one. Yeah. The setup is such that, it looks like Jake is going to take the fight to these Sky People, and, wherever they go next, they're going to build their mercenary army or whatever it is to kind of bring down the man, as it were, right? Don't get me wrong. I think that's great. I think that's good. But I thought the way they were setting it up, or at least in my mind, especially after what Neytiri did, I thought and he saved his dad, I thought that he was going to end up going with his dad and then kind of being like, man, I trusted you guys, and now Neytiri wants to kill me. What the hell? Like, I get it that my dad's a bad guy, but I'm not the bad guy, but you're treating me like one of them because of it. So now it's over. Our friendship is over, and I'm going to now throw in with my dad, and it's going to be, the humans versus the Na'vi, or at least the kids versus each other.
Yeah, I thought that's what they were, like, building towards. It seemed like they were doing that. And for me, I'm honestly really glad they didn't, because that seems just kind of too easy and obvious.
Right.
And it's just like, okay, like, here's this kid and he's kind of getting indoctrinated and like Spider like is kind of a dumb character, like he's kind of an idiot, like he's clearly just like being manipulated by his quote unquote his dad, who's like not his dad, but there's that whole thing. And I like how he saves him, but he's still like, he's like, yeah, I saved you, like didn't want you to die, but that doesn't mean that like I'm gonna go and like fight in your horrible war. Like he's still like, I'm still like, it's messy and it's complicated, and I prefer that kind of just like, yeah, I have all these weird mixed feelings, but I'm gonna stay here. Like, you still suck, dude. And like I like that it leaves him as kind of this character that's kind of still stuck in the middle, rather than doing the obvious thing of like, okay, well now Spider's going to be the big bad in Avatar. Like they're going to set him up in Avatar 4 to be the big bad. So I like that it's a little bit murky with him. I do think that was an interesting, and I think maybe if it was just Cameron writing, he would have done what you said. He
probably would have done that, yeah.
It seems like the easy way to go, but this seems like, all right, I am intrigued by Spider now and like seeing what his character leads to, and because they are seeming like maybe there's gonna be like there's a romance between him and, I always think it's Kitty, but like the Sigourney Weaver character, which I don't know how you would shoot that because Sigourney Weaver is playing a teenager who's like 40, so I don't know what they would do with that. But like there seems to definitely be, he's very invested in this family more so than he is in his own, and now he's a child of two worlds, and to see how that plays out in future installments, I'm very curious about.
There's an X factor, though. The X factor is that I agree that he's kind of like stuck between two worlds, where he's human, but obviously, you know, his heart is, or his culture is with a Na'vi. But now apparently there is a way that he can be like embodied as an avatar, right? I mean, we've seen that with his father, and we've seen that with the other, you know, like the soldiers. And I was wondering if that was going to be used to kind of entice him that, hey, you've always wanted to be a local, right? You've always wanted to be a Na'vi. Now we can give that to you. We'll do the same thing. You know, we'll save your brain and your personality on a hard drive. We'll upload it. We'll reboot you afterwards. But physically, we now have the ability that you don't need the mask. You don't need to worry about, you know, breathing the air. You know, we can give you that. I thought that was going to be like the carrot they were going to dangle in front of him. And then that was going to be kind of like the way that they manipulated him. But that wasn't even like addressed whatsoever. That's
interesting. And I think it might be getting too much into semantics here, but like, I think there is a big difference between what happens with Jake and what happens with, you know, the soldiers, because Jake is like, his brain is downloaded by the tree, whatever, and it's put into that new body. Whereas like these guys are just like clones. Like you see them all die in the first Avatar. So if he was going to go that route, he would have to die. And so maybe they'll do something where his like brain is downloaded, but we know that's kind of not flawless because I think it's been years now since I've seen it, but I think they tried to do that with Sigourney Weaver and it didn't work. And maybe that's why like she ended up like pregnant, like, and got like, you know, we didn't even talk about how that character is maybe immaculately conceived.
That. Yes.
Like, and how like maybe that's when she was trying to get downloaded. Like it didn't work, but then it kind of rebounded her into her body, and then like made a new copy of her or something like that. So that's a whole can of worms.
She gave birth to herself.
Yeah, wow. And so like that's because it's interesting because I went to the bathroom the first time in the scene where she like sees like the real Sigourney Weaver. Yeah. So, and then when I was like, okay, I missed that plot line getting resolved about like her explaining who her dad was and like is it like the actual planet, and then it's just like, no, you'll have to come back in Avatar 3 to see what happens. Like I'm like, all right, this is wild that they just straight up introduce this huge thing and don't even resolve it.
I'm willing to bet that memory, whatever system that they have, because remember they showed that chip or whatever, the memory hard drive basically, right? In the video flashback with Giovanni Ribisi. And I'm willing to bet that's going to be the MacGuffin in either Avatar 3 or 4. Like, I could have sworn by the end of this movie, when we first saw it, I thought what we were going to do is the Colonel was going to die. And I thought that they were going to reveal like a warehouse filled with these tubes of the Colonel, like hundreds and hundreds of him, being
Oh, Star Wars, the clones.
Star Wars
yes.
style. And I thought what was going to happen was that Avatar 3, they were going to be like, all right, we have to destroy this facility, and that's going to be the MacGuffin, right? Because in the first one, the MacGuffin was unobtainium or whatever that mineral was. In the second one, it's this brain whale juice. What's it going to be in the third one? Like they're moving. So I thought that was going to, because it was such an offhand comment and it was such a minor thing that I thought, oh, well, clearly they're going to set it up for the third or fourth one when they go on the offense. This is how they're going to cripple the Sky People's way of kind of taking over Pandora, is if we destroy this factory that's basically just producing all these clones.
Yeah, well, one thing I think that they very briefly, like, it gets glossed over and, like, never really mentioned again, but it's going to clearly be important in the future ones, is Edie Falco says, oh yeah, we're not here to just mine the planet, we're gonna repopulate it. And you're like,
right.
What?
Yeah,
That's a huge thing. And then they just don't address it again. You're like, alright, I guess they're saving that for future Avatar sequels. But that's clearly where this franchise is going to be going, is that they're going to try to make this like the new Earth, which I don't understand because they literally can't breathe it. So are the next one's going to be about like terraforming it and making the air breathable for for humans?
Oh, good point.
This movie has so much, the trick of this movie for me is that it's got so much visual stuff that it's easy to gloss over some of these like really important or like really critical like plot elements, right? We haven't talked about that at all, right? The strategy of the Sky People is now totally different. Mm-hmm. It was like this mineral that was in the earth. All right, apparently that's not the best thing they've got anymore. Now it's, whale brain juice, right? That is $80 million a tube, and it's used to literally, as they say, stop aging. And now they want to actually like live on this place, which it's not clear why. Yeah. They've glossed over that. They've glossed over the fact that they've got, some pretty cool like droids or something that are like building everything. And they said like, we've done more in the last year than we've done like the previous 10 or 30 or whatever it was. Like all this is kind of is missed because like the visuals are like so overwhelming that you're almost just like, wow, like look at all the pretty stars and the fish and the tentacles and the stuff, right? And you miss like, wait a second, this is like really, really critical to, is this just like a throwaway line, or is this like something we should be latching onto and really be talking about the future of this franchise?
But let me ask you, Ethan. Derick, I know you said you saw the film twice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ethan,
would you go back and watch this a second time?
First of all, bravo. That's 7 hours of viewing time. I mean, that's a huge time commitment, right?
Yeah.
Just imagine it's a huge time commitment. I would not call a friend and be like, hey, you want to go see Avatar? I'd love to see it again. If someone called me and said, hey, I haven't seen it yet, you want to go? I'd probably be like, I'm not doing anything tonight. I'll go. If I had plans, I wouldn't like adjust my plans to go a second time. But if someone called me and I had nothing going on, yeah, I'd go again. I'd sit through the 3 hours.
Yeah, and that's essentially what happened with me, is because I saw it like opening night or opening weekend, and then my family always, for Christmas Eve, we go out and see, whatever the big movie is of the year. Well, this is the first time we've done it in a couple of years, obviously, but so yeah, they were like, we're going to go see Avatar 2, and I was like, I've already seen this 3-hour movie, but yeah, I can go again. I'll enjoy myself.
You saw it in 3D both times?
I saw it, the first time I saw it in 2D, so I got to see it, so I was also jazzed to go back and see it in 3D. I didn't see it in the variable frame rate, which you touched on a little bit at the beginning, Pete.
Yeah.
So that I'm curious, like, how that experience was, because I don't know, like, because I know that it was some scenes were still in the 24 frames per second and some were in 48, so I didn't get that experience. So I really am curious what that was like and how your brain adjusted to that.
It's not as jarring as you think it would be, and I think it's primarily because so much of the movie is CG'd. I think it was the first, maybe the second Hobbit movie in the trilogy. I think that was the first movie I saw in high frame rate, and that was a consistent 48 frames per second throughout. And that was very obvious, but I think it was also because it was the first one I saw in the theaters that was in a high frame rate, so it was really clear that it was moving much more differently than otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because so much of the movie is so CG heavy and so much underwater, I didn't catch on to the fact that it was changing. If it was changing at all. It felt throughout the whole movie, it felt like it was going at 48.
Okay, that's interesting.
So having seen it in the theater, I wanted to ask, what was the experience like? Was the crowd jazzed? Was it loud? Was it packed? Were people cheering?
That's a good question. What was it like in LA?
I saw this in Orange County, California, and yeah, it was packed. Like at least the first one was. People were there. Like it was like I'm pretty sure like a sold out theater. I was seeing it with my friend, and we were like figuring out when. I was like, oh, like a week or so beforehand. I was like, we got to get the tickets now because every showing is selling out. Like these were all like even the 2D one at like relatively early, because we saw it like relatively early on like the Friday that it came out, but like at like a 5:00 showing or something. But even like that 2D one was completely packed. I would have loved to have. I wanted to initially see the IMAX 3D one, but those had been sold out forever. But yeah, it was packed. People were excited. That's one good thing about like the theaters around here is Cameron's gone on about how this movie is available in more formats than any movie ever. And yeah, really it is. Like, and there's like, I could have seen this in Dolby or IMAX or 3D IMAX or 2D IMAX or all of these different things. But yeah, people were in there. People were excited. People were digging it. There was clearly some people who were excited. And, it's interesting because I feel like this is a movie where it doesn't have like a crazy devoted fan base. I mean, there are like very devoted people, but it's not something, it's fallen out of the cultural lexicon a little bit. It's not something like Star Wars or Marvel where there are these like, people who are like, oh, midnight showing, I gotta go to dress up and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, people were still like, I think it was a lot of like movie fans. There's a lot of people who were like, I like movies, and not necessarily like highbrow movies. We were just like the same people who were going to see Top Gun. I think we're going to see this movie, if that makes sense.
That sounds like a great atmosphere. And that's like, I mean, it just makes watching like so much more enjoyable when you've got like this buzz around the film, right? Like there's, as you mentioned, Pete, like Top Gun, like Maverick was one of the first films that like really got everyone like super, super jazzed. And like you felt like you were going to an event. Some films, it's like, we've got to choose something for date night, so we'll go see this. But some of these films are like really like an event, and Avatar was. And I think that even though a lot of us went in with like kind of meh expectations, I think it's fair to say that maybe we're not like counting down the days for the third one, but we're probably a lot more excited about it than we thought we would be, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I'm like, okay, cool. Avatar 3, I'm going to be there,
Yeah. Definitely, we're going to be there now. Okay, we'll do another breakdown after that as well. We'll see if Spider is still on part of the Sully family or what happens, right? We've got more to do with a lot of family relations going on.
Man, it's crazy. I was just thinking about like when the last movie came out. Between this, I was a teenager. I'm in my 30s now. Like that's how long it has been since the last one came out.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I don't know if the duration between the first and the second one was a benefit or a deterrent. Mm-hmm. Like Top Gun, there was such a long period of time between the original and the sequel that it almost made it like such a cultural phenomenon. Whereas sometimes if it's just like 2 years later, it's like, I've already got my fill. Like, I don't need another helping of this. And Avatar, yeah, but I was just going to say, like, Avatar came, like, right at the precipice. Like, we kind of forgot about it, but it was still something that we knew. And I felt like it was, for me, that's why it was, like, not that exciting. But I have to say, it came back in a really strong way.
Yeah, and, I think it is right there at the sweet spot that, like, it's 14 years, like, that 14, 15 year, like, right when it starts to be like almost a legacy sequel is right about the time where you're like, you do have a lot of that nostalgia baked in for people that saw the original, but they haven't forgotten it yet. Like, the same thing I think happened with the Jurassic Park movies where There was no Jurassic Park from 2001 until 2015. Same gap, 14
rest
years.
in peace, Jurassic Park.
And people like that. People were excited. I was one of them where I was like, "Oh wow! Like I love Jurassic Park. I'm really excited to be going back to this franchise after such a big gap." And it's not something like where people had forgotten about it over the years. It's where something like, I don't know, like Blade Runner, where I feel like there was a much bigger gap in Blade Runner movies that a lot of people might not have, grown up with Blade Runner like they did with Jurassic Park or Avatar. Like
different generation, yeah.
So I think that's why a movie like that maybe not did as well. But then you see with the Jurassic Park movies kind of diminishing returns with each one. Like they all still made a lot of money, but each one kind of made a little bit less than last. Because there's not that like, oh wow, we haven't seen one of these in a decade and a half. We got to go back. And it's just like, oh, it's just another one of these now. Like you said, just 2 years later. Is it? I do wonder if it's gonna be as successful as this one, because there's not that like, wow, we've been waiting for this. And I think that's one thing too, that why Indy 5 might be a big success is because it's like, we haven't had.
This is a good prediction. Yeah, this is a good prediction.
Because the Indy movies, because it was like the original 3 came out in the 80s, and then nothing came out till 2007, and now in 2023 we're getting the 5th one. So there was a huge gap between 3 and 4, and then again 4 and 5, where they're both essentially legacies equals to themselves. And I think that with there being a big gap in the indie movies, once again, you are able to rebuild that. If this had come out right on the heels of 4, which a lot of people didn't like, I think people would not be excited. But people are like, okay, people are kind of remembering the first one and the third one especially. You've got James Mangold coming in, so like I think, like we said, Steven Spielberg is kind of not doing these type of movies anymore. But you're like, oh, we got the guy who made Logan to do this one, and it's John Williams' last movie, and Harrison Ford is like, it's like, I think they're gonna go out on top. You're excited for Indy 5 a little bit in a way that you would not have been excited for Indy 5 if it had come out in like 2010 or something.
Is Spielberg directing this, or is he just?
He's not. He's just a producer. Yeah, James Mangold is directing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so which I love James Mangold. I love 3:10 to Yuma. I love a lot of his movies. Ford v Ferrari is a great film, so I'm really excited that they have kind of got some new blood to do it, because I think Spielberg he obviously loves Indiana Jones, but I don't think he's that kind of director anymore.
No, and that's what I was kind of alluding to. I think he's kind of transitioned to saying, hey, look, everything I do now I think is going to be a passion project, let's call it that. And not necessarily, my passion isn't necessarily to make $1 billion in the theater anymore. Whereas I think James Cameron still wants to make his, high quality blockbusters, but I think most of them are blockbusters. They're not really think pieces per se.
Yeah, and I think when Spielberg recently has tried to kind of recapture that early Spielberg Jurassic Park Indiana Jones magic, it's not been great. Like, like when he does, like his recent, like big quote unquote blockbuster, like genre films have been Ready Player One and the BFG, which are not good movies. Like no offense to anybody who likes those movies.
Be careful about Ready Player One.
Not my favorite film.
Carefully.
The book did not work for me.
Maybe I'm biased because I thought the book was so amazing, I
think generally speaking, people who really like the book didn't like the movies.
I didn't like the movie compared to the book, but I love the book so much that I still give the movies some of the goodwill.
And that's totally fair. But I think that it's not Jurassic Park and it's not Indiana Jones. I think we can all agree that it's not quite Spielberg's glory days.
No.
Pete made the call and he said he thought that the deciding factor on whether Indy 5 is going to be amazing or not is going to be the de-aging and how that looks.
And how it's used. Ford. If it's going to be excessive or not. Based on the trailer or that teaser they showed, I'm assuming the Dial of Destiny is some kind of time travel device. I don't know. I have no idea. And it's just, I think there was a shot of a very young Indy in that trailer. So I wonder if that's just a flashback sequence and it's just a short flashback sequence, or if it's going to be a significant amount of time in the movie.
Yeah. I'm really curious. Like, this is a movie that, like, this is probably the movie I'm most excited for in 2023 is Indy 5, because I'm such a big like, especially Raiders and the Last Crusade. I think are both absolutely perfect films.
Yeah.
So if they can recapture some of that Amblin magic, this could be amazing. This is what I am very, very hyped. It's the opposite of Avatar. Like, I am so hyped going into this one.
Yeah.
So you didn't like The Last Crusade?
No, The Last Crusade's my favorite.
Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, yeah.
Yeah, Temple of Doom is solid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, it had its
Kingdom
problems,
of the Crystal
but it
Skull
still
that we
felt like
didn't
a proper
Yeah.
indie film. I think that's the difference between Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull. Like, a lot of people had problems with Crystal Skull. A lot of people had problems with Temple of Doom. But between the two of them, I still felt like Temple of Doom felt like a proper indie film. And I didn't feel that about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I'd say that 1 and 3, like Raiders and Last Crusade, are just amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. I even like Crystal Skull, but it's not quite the same. You can feel like maybe they're going through a little bit of the There's still good stuff in it, though. There's still fun indie stuff in it. It is kind of interesting to see. I do think that Indy has had a really interesting character arc over the 4 films, and to see where he ends up will be interesting because, chronologically speaking, the first one is Temple of Doom, and that's when he's kind of at his gruffest and meanest, and he's softened up a little bit by the third one. I think they're all great, but the original trilogy is kind of untouchable. Even if Temple of Doom is not my favorite, I still think they're all classics.
Dial of Destiny. When is it coming out? Do we know what month? Is it a summer?
Say May? At least over here in the States.
Oh. Yeah, on IMDb it says June 30. It just shows a photo of him in the trademark hat, and it just says June 30. That's all it says.
So it'll be in the summer window, which is also good.
Oh, yeah. Summer release. Nice.
4th of July in the U.S., right? This is the big weekend. And that means, does that mean it's the only thing coming out, right? Because now
you'll have the Flash movie before that, and after that you'll have 2 weeks after that you have Mission Impossible. So for a small subset of the audience, they're going to have a 2-week window, basically a free and clear run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of what studios have been doing now, we were just
saying that. That's absolutely right, Derek. Yeah. Everyone's like so friendly now. It's like they're gentlemen, they're like, no, sir, like this is your time slot. By all means, please take these 2 weeks, we'll take the subsequent 2 weeks. Everyone's like, so there's no competition anymore, right? You go to the cinema exactly after you. Oh, would you like the Christmas weekend? Would you like New Year's?
I think it's really funny because half of me thinks that, it's they're being polite, but I think the other half is also just like, that's what you get when you have an oligopoly in Hollywood. Yeah. Now, you only have 4 main studios. Let's not tread on each other. If you looked at the breakdown of 2022, it was like the split between the 4 major studios was almost exactly 25% in terms of box office revenue gross. Mm-hmm. So, plus or minus a couple of percentage points here and there. But it was relatively even. It wasn't so lopsided. So, I mean, look, that's me with my tinfoil hat on.
Yeah. I mean, Pete and I were talking about it, and we said, look, our perception that we were kids is that we went to the cinema with no tickets, and we stood in line, and there were like 5 blockbusters all at the same time. Mm-hmm. But realistically, we went to the cinema without tickets, and there was nothing that we ever recognized playing. It was just that we're lumping together a decade of films, and we thought it was all playing at the same time that one weekend, right? Just randomly. It was Back to the Future, Top Gun, what else? Three Men and a Baby and Short Circuit, like all playing at 7:15 p.m. on a Friday. Yeah. Realistically, those are like all 5 years apart, but in our mind, they were all there that Friday night.
No, and you know what the other thing is? I think it's also watching cinema in the US, and this is not something I've experienced anywhere else. It was also kind of like you buy one ticket, they check the ticket at the door, and then you kind of have free run on the place. So I remember even, in college, the first time... No assigned
seats. Yeah.
It's like you go into cinema, it's a 30-screen theater, which is almost unheard of anywhere outside of the US. and you go in and see a movie at 3 p.m., you finish it, and then you immediately run into screen 6 across the way and see the next movie that's playing, and no one's really checking your ticket. So, I mean, I know that's not bad.
No wonder you saw so many movies as a kid. No wonder you were only paying for one.
I'm just saying it was so easy to do there. Like here, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just saying you don't do that here. You don't go and spend, 12 pounds and then watch 14 movies in a day and then come out like when the sun's down, right? So
you're also an adult now.
I'm also an adult.
I mean, when you're a kid, you were going at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday and you had like no obligations. You could stay there until midnight. Now you've got stuff to do, so...
Oh, it's funny because I just wanted to add one more thing to like what you guys were saying about like studios kind of like playing nice, quote unquote. And I think that a big part of it too is that they've I think there was the prevailing wisdom for a while that's like, okay, well, you can open your movie like this big blockbuster movie, and then we'll have a rom-com, and then they won't really compete with each other. And then you see stuff like Endgame opens, and they're like, whatever other studio, I can't remember who released it, but they released that movie Long Shot, the Charlize Theron, Seth Rogen romantic comedy. And people were like, people were like,
I love that movie.
Yeah. People were like, okay, well, some people will go see Endgame, but that's not for everybody, so some people will go see Long. And I even remember, even the advertising campaign for Long Shot addressed the fact that it was coming out the same, because like Seth Rogen was like, yeah, go see Endgame, and then come and see our movie. And no one did. I think that studios have like learned the lesson from that kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, if there is a movie like Endgame or Indiana Jones or Avatar, it doesn't matter what you are. You could be a completely different kind of movie. Everyone's going to see this movie, and you're going to get killed. So just wait 2 weeks and then come out, and some people might see your movie. I don't think you're going to see... Like, I do think, like you said, like, everything wasn't coming out on the same time. But if you look at, like, the summer of 82 and just, like, the insane amount of, like Blade Runner came out the same day as, like, I can't remember, like, E.T. or something like that. Like, there was, like, very compacted, all the movies coming out at the same time. And I think that they've kind of learned, like, oh, we can make a lot more money if we space it out a little bit and just don't mess with each other.
I think that's why these investor days for, when you have these media days and investor days where everyone kind of be like, this is what we're releasing this summer on these dates. Mm-hmm. Everyone take note. I think that message isn't necessarily for, Derek. It's not for Ethan. It's not for Pete. I think that message is for Disney saying, hey, Warner Brothers, I know you want to release The Flash this summer. Just know that I'm also releasing Ms. Marvel or whatever this summer as well. So let's be careful of each other, right?
Yeah, and I think that there is a mindset of they talked about what's the I can't remember his name, the Marvel guy who wears a hat. Kevin Feige has talked about how he's like, yeah, people have this perception of like it's us versus DC or something like that, and he's like, I want DC films to succeed because he's like, to the general film goer, they just see this as superhero films. They're not like watching. People like you and I would be like, okay, well, The Flash is DC and Batman's DC and, Captain America's Marvel or whatever. But somebody goes and they're like, he's like, yeah, if someone goes and sees, the original Suicide Squad or Batman v Superman, they're like, this movie sucked. I'm not going to go see the next superhero movie. They're not like, I'm not going to go see the next DC movie, but I'll stick to Marvel. There are certainly... Like, if you were on the internet a lot, you think that's how it works, but that's not really how it works with, like, the general film. Like, my mom wouldn't be able to tell you if Batman is DC or Marvel, and she's just gonna be like, okay, I like this superhero movie, I'll go see the next one, and it's kind of a rising tide. I love that Derek is
using the mom index as well. I use the mom index all the time, which is, like, the benchmark for, like, what's really happening in the world, right? If a mom knows... Yeah. Then it means like it's hit like mainstream pop culture, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it's just like, I think it's the rising tide raises all ships with this kind of thing.
It's a lot easier though when you're at Marvel to say like, oh, I really want DC to be successful. It almost sounds like it's like a little bit of a dig, like
you're right, yeah.
Yeah, you guys are like a total dumpster fire, but no, we really want you guys to be good.
We want you guys to be good. Take James Gunn, please. He's done a lot of good stuff for us. He can help you guys too.
Yeah.
Just cancel everything and start all over. But we really want you guys to be successful.
Yeah. Having said that, I mean, I crap on DC a lot. And it's not because I'm a Marvel fanboy, even though I am a Marvel fanboy. But I also have that mentality, which is, look, I want to see a good Superman movie. I want to see a good Batman movie because that's going to ensure that the next Captain America movie or the next Avengers movie is going to be all the better because they're going to be competing. So, fair enough. Fingers crossed that James Gunn is able to kind of pull it out together and kind of do a hard reset or a soft reset, whatever it takes. Let's have faith. James Gunn was able to pull it off with lesser known characters, with the Guardians in the MCU, to a limited extent with the Suicide Squad, the sequel at least. Let's see what he can do with the actual universe that he's got his hands on.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see where that goes.
Okay, so look, we kind of got off on another tangent. Let's go back to Avatar for a second.
Avatar. This is an Avatar episode, by the way.
So generally speaking, Ethan and I have a simple rating. We don't give anyone numbers. We don't say, this is an A. We don't think this is a B. We have a 3-tier rating. Is Avatar 2: A Way of Water a must go to the cinema to watch, a wait for it to come on streaming before you watch it there, or is it a skip?
I think, you can't watch this movie on a small screen. You gotta go on the big screen. This honestly would be closer, I would say it would be closer to a skip than a small screen. Like, do not watch this movie. Like, definitely go see this in the theater, and if you miss it in the theater, you skip it. But yeah, like, this is, like we said, a real cinematic experience. This is why you go to the movies, is for something like an Avatar. Don't watch this movie at home, honestly. Like, go see it on as big a screen you can. Go to an IMAX, 3D, whatever. If you can still find, go on, like, if you can, like a Friday night or something. And I think this movie's, it's still making a lot of money, so it should still be packed, and get your tub of popcorn. And, I don't know if you guys have Nicole Kidman over there before you're at your AMC's telling you about the movie beforehand, but that's always part of the theatrical experience for me. Is it takes me a place I've never been before. So, so I don't know if that's lost on an international audience, but that's always something that I love to experience going to the movies. So yeah, this is a real movie,
We've got John Boyega doing that here.
Oh, okay.
What about you, Ethan?
I totally agree with Derick. I think this is a must watch. You have to go to a cinema. You have to see it. And it's right. Go see it on IMAX, see it on a big screen, go see it in 3D, see it with Dolby, enjoy it. If this isn't a movie that you want to see in a cinema, then honestly, you should never go to a cinema. This is by definition something that has to be seen in a cinema. It's long, but you won't regret it. I hesitate to say good value for money, but like whoever you take with you should enjoy it as well. I think absolutely go see it in a cinema now.
So even though I have a lot of issues with the movie, I too hesitate to call it a wait for streaming, even though that's what I think the movie is. But for exactly the same reasons as Derick has said and as Ethan has said, this is not a movie you can enjoy to the same level on your small, 42-inch screen at home as compared to screen on IMAX with the proper sound system. The system is what it is. This is a must watch in cinema. You may not love the movie, but this is the quintessential summer, although it's not a summer, but blockbuster in Hollywood. This is the movie where you're going to love the visual effects. You're going to love the sound effects. And it's stuff that you're never going to have seen before. Admittedly, 90% of the visual effects I have never seen before. And it leaves me wanting to see more and actually excited for Avatar 3, which is something I didn't think I would say before I watched this movie. So I wholeheartedly agree. This is a must watch in cinema. And clearly it's doing very well. It's about to cross $2 billion worldwide. There's something definitely to it.
That's a crazy amount of money for this movie, huh?
And the thing is, it needed to make that amount of money because they spent so much money on it, and people don't really realize that movies have to make 2-3 times their budget to be profitable, because they give half the budget back or half the grosses back to the theater. In China, they give 80% back to the Chinese government. You have to spend almost as much on advertising as you spend on the movie itself. So you really have to and for a movie with this much production, this big of an advertising budget, like you really had to like be like, I think James Cameron said it had to be one of like the 5 most profitable movies of all time to make money, and that's what it's doing. So
yeah. I think he was being a bit specious, but that's something that we talk about quite often.
Yeah.
We, Ethan and I do talk about that quite often. I think most recently we had that debate about Black Adam and The Rock's, let's call it, finagling of his numbers. But I think, this movie supposedly cost like almost $500 million to make. They probably spent $250 million advertising it, maybe more. So yeah, you're looking at least $1.5 billion to break even. That's just to break even. But I think what I think this movie really does is, we don't know how much of that budget has gone towards the third movie. And I think a lot of it does set up the third movie quite nicely. So all of the successes that can be attributed to Avatar 2, I think builds a lot of goodwill for the success of Avatar 3 as well.
Derek, what do you think? I thought that the box office take has actually exceeded studio expectations. Do you think that's right? Like, I think even they're like smiling and saying, hey, that's a little bit better than even we projected.
Yeah, I think so, because this movie, and the thing is, like, it's still making money. And so I think that's the thing that they are really happy about, is because, when this movie first came out, like it opened really big, obviously, but I don't think it didn't open like our Marvel movie. But a lot of people were saying like, oh, look at the way it opened, look at the way Titanic opened, look at the way Avatar 1 opened, where they opened pretty big, not humongous, and then they just had legs. Like the multiplier on this thing is so good, and it just
phenomenal so far.
And it just keeps like making money and making money and making money. And I think that's a thing. It's not going to have like Avatar 1 legs or it's necessarily not Titanic legs, because the film landscape has changed. But even something like we said, Top Gun this year had just phenomenal staying power. And I think you might see something like this where like 2-3 months later, it's still in theaters and it's still taking in money, especially because, that's one thing that James Cameron does that's very smart. He opens his movies, his big blockbusters, not in the summer where there's a lot of competition, but he opens them in December where there's not that many other movies, and then he has basically January to himself, because like Megan and Plane aren't going to take away, like his money. So
oh man, I have no desire to see
an open track until Ant-Man, pretty much.
He's got almost 2 months to himself. The streaming landscape has changed now. I think in 2009, the sales of DVDs were still quite significant. I think Avatar 1 still made like $500 million on DVD sales. I don't know if that's going to persist. Exactly, but I don't think that's going to necessarily persist now. But still, it's not insignificant. And for them to still cross $2 billion, only 5 weeks into it, they're still, I think this movie is going to have the legs to comfortably get through to February.
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point, because the streaming landscape has changed so much, and we don't really know about how things are affected in the streaming, but you have something like, I always bring up Encanto, which was a movie that did not do well at the box office, but then a month later drops on streaming and it becomes a huge hit, and it was very successful for Disney Plus. And so when this eventually drops out of the theaters, it's going to be on Disney Plus, and that is going to be a driving force on Disney Plus. I think, how many people, who signed up for Paramount Plus until Top Gun Maverick showed up on that, So, I think that you could have the same thing where people, I know a lot of people already have Disney Plus, so it's not going to be the same thing, but you could see this being, a major driving force for getting, an advertising thing of, oh, guess what? Avatar 2 drops on Disney Plus this date. Sign up. So it's even going to continue to make Disney money after it's not in theaters anymore.
I totally agree.
So we've got 2 years. We've got 2 years to wait, right? About 23 months to wait until Avatar 3 comes out. We don't even know the working title. We're not sure if it's going to be air, land, sea, ash,
space.
Core, space. We're not sure, but generally, we've all said we're pretty enthusiastic about it, even though the cast is going to be the same age in the film. In real life, when we see the press tour, they're going to be
Spider's
dramatically
gonna be
older,
29
than they were. Spider's gonna be like 30.
But, we made that point earlier as well. Good for James Cameron. I think he made an offhand comment about, I think his comparison was to that of Stranger Things, which is to say, hey, look, that's why I think they filmed a lot of 3 along with 2, which was to say, we want to make sure that the kids look the same age in both movies, unlike in Stranger Things, where all of a sudden these look like 25-year-old men still playing, junior high students. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, they just put like Sadie Sink in pigtails so she still looks young or whatever. I'm like, she's like 23.
It's so funny to see, right? It's so funny to see Dustin, who's pretending to be like a 16-year-old D&D nerd, which is great. Be a D&D nerd, but you're not 16
And how old is he in real life? He's like 24?
Yeah, all of the principal actors are in like their early 20s. He's like 24? Mid-20s. No one is buying Finn Wolfhard as a 17-year-old kid anymore.
That's why you got to cast somebody like Tom Holland, who, despite being in his like almost late 20s now, he still looks like he's 15 years old.
Or like Tom Cruise on the other end of spectrum, or Paul Rudd, who still looks the same for the last 30 years.
Oh man, I have to say, I'm really excited about Ant-Man. Yeah, I'm really excited about Ant-Man. Me too. It looks good.
Yeah, I'm very stoked for that. It looks
surprisingly good.
Yeah.
For a movie that before that franchise ever started, I was kind of like, Ant-Man? There's going to be a movie about Ant-Man? I have to say, Paul Rudd, who's the Wasp?
Evangeline Lilly.
She's really, Evangeline Lilly. I have to say, like, they've really captivated me.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, no, I can't wait.
I'm more excited about the fact that it's going to set up Phase 4 and 5. I don't know much. Like, I really like Jonathan Majors. I thought he was excellent in Loki, so I'm super excited to see what happens going forward. I'm more intrigued by how this sets up the phase than I am just for the movie. To be determined what happens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this leads into Creed 3.
Exactly. For those of you who don't understand, Jonathan Majors is the main, let's say, antagonist in Creed 3.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I'm glad you got that one. I'm glad somebody understood that joke.
No, I'm with you. All right, so thank you very much. I think that's a good discussion we've had on Avatar.
Yeah, so thank you for Derick for joining. I think we hit Avatar and a bunch of other stuff. And actually, it gave us a lot of other ideas for really, really important topics that we've got to have like emergency episodes on, right?
Absolutely. And so Derick, do us a favor. Tell our friends, tell our audience, tell our listeners a little bit more. Where can they find you? Where can they find Underrated?
Yeah, thank you. So, Underrated, it's on all the podcast apps. So however you are listening to this, you can just look up Underrated or Undercast Company. That's kind of the name that me and my friends use when we're making podcasts. We do a few other things as well. If you want to look up Undercast Company on any of the socials, Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff, will come up. But just look up Underrated on Apple, Spotify. We're on YouTube as well. We do a video podcast, and we come out every other Monday, have a new episode.
Oh, that's great.
Perfect. And we will make sure we include links on the bottom of this video and on all our socials so that you guys can connect with Derick McDuff at Underrated and the Undercast Company.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you guys, by the way, for having me on. I had a lot of fun talking with you guys about this movie and everything else. Like, this has been great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, dude, for joining us. Very, very good episode. Pete, as always, thank you for bringing the energy. We appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks, guys. And Derick, I look forward to having you back on when we discuss whatever it is we're going to discuss next.
Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Go see Avatar.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely weekend ahead of you guys. Follow us at Films and Stuff Podcast on Instagram or at F&S Podcast on Twitter. Aloha at filmsandstuffpodcast.com. Drop us a like. Leave us a comment.
Aloha means hello. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day ahead. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.